This is part 1 of Glorious. This video includes the prologue and the dream sequence. The prologue. It had been some time since I had taken the stroll to the grave of my friends. Even longer since I had told someone the full story of our lives together. Our son captured his father's heart from the moment he was born, and he had known our story from the time he was young. There had never been any secrets. However, he was grown now and had little ones of his own to look after. I always treasured the days I got to spend with them, especially on the days where they could run around excitedly without worry or fear. It reminded me of when we were young and reckless. Every part of my being hoped they would never face the trials we had. I began the walk to the graves knowing they would follow close behind. They always had questions about each grave and the names on them. From the moment they could talk, they had made up their own stories while looking at photo albums from our shelves. Of my friends, my family, and what they might have gotten up to. Despite that, nothing they imagined could have been wild enough to even touch the truth. Our adventures were beyond imagination. Even now, I sometimes struggled to comprehend everything we had been through. Their grandfather had always wanted to tell them the story, just as he had with our son. These days had always been the ones he treasured most with our son. The hazy summer afternoons when the grass was green and there were just enough clouds in the sky to cover the sun and keep it from burning. In the distance, the gleam of the Vital could be seen, but it was rarely visited anymore, not by myself. Occasionally, people would come to see it as if it were a museum and take pictures with the famous anti-government ship. They didn't know the truth, that we had never really been anti-government. We had just been in difficult circumstances. Yet it was always nice in a way to know our friends were remembered and that they got to rest close to the place we had called home for so many years. The place we had grown up together. The place our children had spent their first years in. I wasn't even sure people remembered them, or if they just remembered the ship. No one was about to look at the old lady watching from her deck and think she had once been a part of it. No one ever walked the tree line to the graves to see the names on them. They just wanted to see her. That same ship had been almost a play place for the grandkids. Supervised, they had been allowed to go play pretend as much as they wanted. There had been times they had played spaceship, and I could only laugh at how true it was. Without telling them, she had been out to space a couple of times in her existence. With them gone, though, it had been too difficult to talk about. Their grandfather's was still the newest grave in the group, the one that wasn't covered with moss, wasn't weathered from so many years in the elements. Even the words on them were slightly faded, readable, but not as brilliant as they used to be. The stone was even chipped in spots, yet there were flowers on each one, placed by those who had come to remember and to pay respect to their friends. Their grandfather's was still fresh, even if not new. Yet somehow, it wasn't the one that hurt the most. He had lived a good life and died older than he ever thought he would have. He had lived life to the fullest with no regrets. The one that hurt the most had stood the longest, had been lost too soon, and had made such a huge impact in all of our lives despite us not realizing it for so long. The one who held us together. When they were gone, it was almost impossible to stay as a team. We tried. We had still seen one another, but the other two graves were there for reasons no one could control. I looked over in the distance, noticing a pale-haired girl sitting under a tree, reading a book as an elderly man approached, handsome despite his years. Shaking my head, I knelt by the oldest grave, touching my hand to it, too many emotions to comprehend filling me. I was sad. I was filled with joy at the memories, but there was also a bit of anger which still lingered deep down at how he had been taken from us. Nights full of nightmares had followed his death. Nights woken by the man in my bed who didn't even need to ask why I had been shouting in my sleep. No one who had been there would have needed to ask. I felt someone at my side and looked down with a smile, my eldest granddaughter sitting next to me. "Grandma, are you ever going to tell us what happened?" she asked, her big eyes staring at me with curiosity. Her hair was the same color as her grandfather's, and I knew she would have been his pride and joy for her entire life. Before speaking, I kissed her forehead, gesturing for her 2 siblings to come and sit. "Come close. Get cozy." They scurried closer, tiny feet hitting the ground. One was just barely 4 years old and had all the energy in the world contained within his tiny body. It was a pile-on grandma before I even knew what was happening, and I laughed as I watched them. "Your grandfather wanted so badly to be the one to tell you our wild story," I told them, booping the youngest's nose gently. He giggled and scooched into my lap.
"Is this how you met Grandpa?"
The middle boy asked me, tapping rapidly on my arm to get my attention.
"Please tell me this is how you met Grandpa."
"It's after I met your grandfather, but when we were getting to know each other," I told them, looking down to his grave. It never failed to pull at my heartstrings, knowing he wasn't there to tell them our story, but he would want it to be told anyways. It's time you hear the story of our outrageous friends and the glorious adventures we shared with one another. I could feel my eyes start to tear up at the words, all of the pain and loss hitting in that brief moment. But I pushed it away as quickly as it had come. There would be time for that later. Wiping my eyes, I looked down at the kids around me, grinning at them. For a moment, it felt like I was back in those times. It might be hard to believe, but it all started with a dream. That is the end of the prologue. And we are moving on to Chapter 1, Dreaming, from the perspective of Karri Ryder. I saw her behind me, the VTOL. We hadn't even spent a day aboard her yet, but she was looming over me like a distant memory that hadn't happened. I knew this scene, I just wasn't used to her being there. I knew that as soon as I turned my head to look in front of me, I'd see a meadow, and beyond that, a strange darkness that didn't quite belong. It was always nighttime in this particular dream, but the place had a strange glow to it, which didn't seem like a place I could have ever been. Yet, despite that, why the hell did it all seem so familiar? Finally, I turned my head to look around. No matter how many times I saw the place, I couldn't help but take it all in for a moment. The lines of what seemed to be a kind of tree in the distance, the colors that seemed almost unnatural. Orb-like items floated all around, in all sorts of shades, in all sorts of designs. I took a few steps and reached out to take one. It was quite close to the ground compared to the ones near the tree line, and was a deep, almost purple color. It had craters as if it were the moon in a small version. I couldn't even begin to fathom how something like that could exist. It had a smooth feeling, with dips where the craters were. I could have looked at those small planets for hours without looking around, but I knew how this dream worked. I released the planet and it fell back to where it was, wobbling around as if I had disturbed whatever force had been causing it to move so smoothly. Then I raised my eyes. As much as I wanted to continue to explore, I knew the feeling of whatever was in that darkness urging me forward, and I was weak to deny it. So my steps became a bit more urgent as I walked towards the dark mass, its energy emanating in waves towards me. The same eyes that were always there showed up, golden, bright, and haunting. When I woke from this dream, that would be all I could think about. "Who are you?" I asked them, seeing the darkness start to form slightly into a more human look, as if dark clouds were pushing together to make the form show. What looked like an arm reached out, barely seen in the dark of the evening, and as I walked forward, I knew the person was aware I was here. "Who are you?" I repeated, continuously walking forward. I knew if I kept moving, it would end up waking me from the dream. I was never allowed too close. I was met with only silence, and the vague sound of electricity sparking somewhere around me. As I approached, I reached a hand out. I was within reach, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't seem to get through to whoever was there. It's been years. Please just let me know who you are.